Sometimes the people who change your life are the ones you almost walk past without noticing. The first bell of the new school year echoed across Maple Ridge Elementary, just as Ethan Brooks guided his aging pickup into the crowded parking lot. Parents hurried through the crisp September morning with steaming coffee cups, oversized backpacks, and nervous smiles that tried to hide how quickly another summer had slipped away. Ethan switched off the engine and looked toward the passenger seat where 9-year-old Lily was carefully smoothing the wrinkles from her blue cardigan. "Do I look okay?" she asked, glancing down at the tiny sunflower pin attached near her shoulder. Ethan smiled with the quiet warmth that had carried them through every difficult season since losing Lily's mother years before. "You look exactly like someone who's going to have a great fourth grade year." Lily grinned, unbuckled her seat belt, and reached for his hand. They walked together through the front gates, passing colorful welcome banners fluttering in the gentle breeze, while teachers greeted families by name. Ethan noticed how easily other children ran ahead, but Lily always slowed down just enough to make sure her father stayed beside her. It had become their tradition, one neither of them ever mentioned aloud. Inside the school lobby, polished floors reflected streams of morning sunlight pouring through tall windows. The scent of sharpened pencils, fresh paint, and newly opened books filled the air with something that felt like hope. Ethan knelt to straighten Lily's backpack strap. "Remember," he said softly, "being kind is always more important than being noticed." Before Lily could answer, excited whispers swept across the entrance. Faculty members suddenly stood a little straighter. Several parents turned toward the main doors as a sleek black SUV pulled quietly to the curb outside. A woman stepped out wearing a tailored ivory blazer, her blonde hair moving gently in the morning breeze as she thanked her driver with an easy smile. Claire Whitmore had built one of the country's fastest-growing education technology companies, yet very few people at the school recognized her without the headlines or magazine covers. Today she had come for something much simpler: the launch of a literacy scholarship created in memory of the elementary teacher who had once changed her own life. Carrying only a leather folder instead of an entourage, Claire entered the lobby just as Lily's notebook slipped from her hands. Loose papers scattered across the polished floor like autumn leaves caught by the wind. Ethan immediately knelt to gather them, while several hurried parents stepped around the mess without slowing down. Claire instinctively crouched beside him, collecting pages one by one before either of them fully looked up. "Thank you," Ethan said, accepting the final sheet with an appreciative nod. "Any parent would have done the same," Claire replied gently. Their eyes met for only a heartbeat before a volunteer rushed toward Claire. "Ms. Whitmore, everyone's waiting for you." Ethan assumed she was another district administrator. Claire assumed he was simply another father trying to make ends meet. Neither realized that this ordinary hallway, filled with children's laughter and the sound of lockers clicking open, had quietly become the place where two lonely lives had begun moving toward the same future. The school auditorium filled slowly as folding chairs scraped across the polished floor, and quiet conversations blended with the cheerful laughter of children returning from their classrooms. Ethan remained near the back wall after helping a teacher carry 2 heavy boxes of library books inside. He never looked for recognition. It was simply easier to lend a hand than to stand still. Lily spotted him from across the room and waved enthusiastically before taking her seat with the rest of her class. Ethan answered with the same warm smile that had reassured her through every first day of school since kindergarten. A pair of parents standing nearby glanced toward his worn work boots and faded flannel shirt before returning to their conversation. One whispered that maintenance staff should probably use the side entrance during special events. Ethan heard every word but chose silence instead. He had learned long ago that dignity often spoke loudest when it refused to argue. Across the stage, Claire prepared to introduce the new literacy initiative that her company had quietly funded for schools across the state. Her assistant reviewed the schedule one final time before stepping aside. Claire took a slow breath and looked beyond the bright stage lights into the audience. Her attention drifted almost immediately toward the father she had met in the hallway earlier that morning. He stood alone, listening carefully as though every child in the room mattered equally, not just his own. There was something unusual about the calm way he carried himself. It was not confidence that demanded attention. It was peace that had survived disappointment. The principal welcomed everyone before inviting Claire to the podium. She spoke without polished corporate language, choosing stories instead of statistics. She described the elementary teacher who had once encouraged a shy little girl to believe that books could become bridges toward a different future. The room grew quiet as parents listened. Even Ethan found himself nodding softly. When the presentation ended, children were invited to visit reading stations arranged throughout the library. Lily hurried toward a table filled with classic adventure novels, while Ethan followed at a comfortable distance. Claire stepped down from the stage and thanked volunteers one by one. Their paths crossed again beside a display of handmade bookmarks created by the students. Lily looked up with bright eyes. "Dad, this is the lady who helped pick up my notebook." Claire smiled. "And you must be the young artist who decorated every page." Lily laughed. "Dad says books should always have personality." Claire looked toward Ethan. "That sounds like good advice." He shrugged gently. "Life gets serious enough on its own." Before Claire could answer, another parent approached her with questions about donations and publicity. Cameras appeared almost instantly as local reporters requested photographs. Ethan quietly guided Lily toward the checkout desk, assuming important people belonged with important conversations. Claire noticed him leaving through the corner of her eye. For reasons she could not explain, she found herself watching the ordinary father disappear into the afternoon crowd instead of posing for another picture. Neither of them realized that Lily had already begun weaving an invisible thread between two very different worlds, one built on quiet sacrifice and the other on remarkable success, both waiting for someone to remind them that the greatest chapters often begin with the smallest moments. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm that Ethan understood better than almost anyone. Every morning, he dropped Lily off beneath the tall maple trees outside the school entrance before heading to his maintenance workshop across town. And every afternoon, he returned a few minutes early because he believed no child should ever wonder if someone was coming for them. Lily always spotted him before he spotted her, running across the sidewalk with a smile that made every long workday worthwhile. On Wednesday afternoon, she stopped suddenly beside the school garden. "Dad, can we bring the library books back together? Mrs. Harper said the reading room stays open late today." Ethan nodded without hesitation. Books are always worth another trip. Inside the library, warm afternoon sunlight stretched across rows of shelves filled with well-loved stories. The quiet hum of children reading created the kind of peaceful atmosphere Ethan secretly admired. While Lily wandered toward the chapter books, Ethan noticed a loose shelf leaning slightly forward. Without saying a word, he asked the librarian for a screwdriver and carefully tightened the brackets until the shelf stood perfectly level again. "You did not have to do that," the librarian said gratefully. Ethan smiled. It was easier to fix it than to ignore it. Neither of them realized Claire had witnessed the entire exchange from the far side of the room. She had returned unexpectedly after another meeting with the principal to review the literacy program. Most executives, she worked with expected recognition for every donation they made. The man quietly repairing a bookshelf without anyone asking did not seem interested in recognition at all. Curious, Claire walked toward the circulation desk after. Ethan stepped away. "Does he work for the school?" she asked softly. The librarian shook her head. "No, he just notices things. Last winter he repaired 3 reading tables after pickup because he said children deserved furniture that did not wobble while they learned." Claire glanced toward Ethan as he helped Lily choose another novel. "Does he volunteer often?" "Whenever someone needs help. He never signs his name on anything." Those simple words stayed with Claire long after Ethan and Lily left the building together. The following morning, she found herself arriving at the school earlier than necessary. She told herself it was to inspect the progress of the literacy project, yet her eyes drifted almost immediately toward the front sidewalk. Ethan appeared carrying Lily's backpack because she was balancing a cardboard model of the solar system for science class. When one of the foam planets slipped free and rolled across the pavement, Ethan chased it with exaggerated determination until Lily burst into laughter. Several children nearby laughed with her. Claire smiled before she realized she was smiling. Success had filled her calendar for years, but moments like that seemed strangely rare in her own life. As Ethan waved goodbye and disappeared toward the parking lot, Claire quietly wondered how someone carrying so many ordinary responsibilities could make kindness appear so effortless. She still knew almost nothing about him, Yet for the first time in many years, she found herself hoping tomorrow would bring another ordinary morning at the same school. Friday afternoon arrived with clear blue skies and the first gentle hints of autumn drifting through the playground. Maple Ridge Elementary buzzed with excitement as students prepared for Family Reading Day, an event that invited parents and volunteers to spend an hour sharing stories with the children. Folding tables lined the courtyard beneath colorful banners, while teachers arranged stacks of books and paper crafts. Claire arrived early to greet faculty members and quietly observe how the literacy program was coming together. She expected to spend the afternoon discussing funding and future projects. Instead, her attention was drawn toward a small circle of children gathered beneath an old oak tree. Ethan sat on a wooden bench with an open adventure novel resting across his knees, while Lily leaned comfortably against his shoulder. His voice was calm and expressive, never loud, yet every child nearby listened with complete attention. Even students who had wandered over out of curiosity slowly settled onto the grass, eager to hear what happened on the next page. Claire remained several yards away, watching without interrupting. There was no audience to impress, no cameras, no speeches, only a father who understood that giving someone your full attention could be the greatest gift of all. When the reading session ended, a sudden gust of wind swept across the courtyard. Dozens of worksheets and handmade bookmarks lifted from a nearby activity table, scattering across the lawn. Several younger children immediately chased after them, laughing as colorful pages skipped across the grass. One little boy became overwhelmed when his carefully decorated bookmark disappeared beneath a hedge, his eyes filling with disappointment. Ethan stood at once, smiling gently. "Do not worry," he said. "Stories always find their way home." He gathered a handful of loose papers before kneeling beside the child to help search beneath the bushes. Within moments, he found the bookmark, brushed away a few leaves, and handed it back as though returning a priceless treasure. The little boy smiled with visible relief and wrapped both hands around the drawing. Nearby teachers exchanged grateful looks. Claire noticed something even more remarkable. Ethan never looked around to see who had witnessed the moment. He simply returned to helping another group of children collect scattered supplies. The principal approached Claire quietly. "That happens almost every week," she said with a smile. "If someone needs help, he somehow notices before anyone else." Claire watched Ethan carry a box of books back toward the library, while Lily proudly walked beside him, holding only one small paperback. "Does he volunteer here often?" Claire asked. "Whenever his work schedule allows. He says children remember kindness much longer than they remember decorations." Those words settled deeply inside Claire. She had spent years building successful companies, negotiating complicated partnerships, and leading thousands of employees. Yet she suddenly realized that the most influential person on the school grounds was a father wearing faded jeans and work boots. As the afternoon sunlight stretched long golden shadows across the playground, Claire found herself no longer measuring people by accomplishments or titles. She was beginning to measure them by something quieter, something that Ethan Brooks seemed to carry naturally wherever he went. And without realizing it, her admiration had already taken its first silent step towards something much deeper. Late September settled gently over Maple Ridge, painting the school grounds with shades of gold and amber as the maple leaves began their slow journey to the sidewalks below. The excitement of the new school year had softened into familiar routines, and somewhere inside those ordinary days, a friendship neither Ethan nor Claire had expected was quietly beginning to take shape. It started with something as simple as Lily asking if Claire would visit the reading room after school to hear the story her class had been practicing all week. Claire adjusted her afternoon schedule without hesitation. For the first time in years, an important meeting was postponed because one little girl had smiled and said, "I think you will like the ending." When Claire arrived, Lily proudly read every page with determination, stumbling over only a few difficult words before looking toward her father. Ethan never corrected her immediately. Instead, he waited patiently until she figured them out herself. Claire noticed the quiet encouragement in his eyes and realized that confidence was not something he gave Lily with compliments alone. He gave it through trust. After the reading session ended, the three of them walked slowly toward the playground where children laughed beneath the bright afternoon sun. Lily skipped ahead to join several classmates. leaving Ethan and Claire standing beside a white wooden fence overlooking the soccer field. She has become much more confident, Claire said warmly. Ethan smiled as he watched his daughter. She teaches me as much as I teach her. Claire laughed softly. That sounds backwards. Children usually know what matters long before adults remember. His answer lingered between them long after the conversation moved on. There was no attempt to impress her, no carefully rehearsed wisdom. Only honest observations gathered from years of raising a daughter with patience instead of certainty. A cool breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass across the field as parents slowly gathered for pickup. Claire glanced toward Ethan. Do you ever wish life had turned out differently? The question escaped before she could stop herself. Ethan looked toward the horizon where the afternoon light rested gently against the rooftops surrounding the school. There were dreams that changed, he admitted quietly. But Lily never became one of the things I gave up. She became the reason every other sacrifice made sense. Claire lowered her eyes for a moment, unexpectedly moved by the simplicity of his answer. She had spent years surrounded by people who measured success through promotions, investments, and headlines. Standing beside Ethan, she was beginning to understand another kind of success entirely, one built from thousands of ordinary moments that no newspaper would ever print. A joyful voice interrupted their thoughts. Miss Claire, come see this. Lily hurried toward them, holding a drawing she had finished during art class. The picture showed 3 people standing beneath a large oak tree, smiling while holding books instead of balloons. Ethan noticed the third figure immediately. Who is this? He asked gently. Lily beamed. That is Miss Claire. Every good story needs another friend. Claire felt an unexpected warmth rise behind her eyes as she accepted the drawing with both hands. She thanked Lily quietly before carefully placing the picture inside her leather folder instead of leaving it with the other school papers. Neither adult fully understood why that simple drawing felt so important, but as they walked toward the parking lot beneath the fading afternoon light, it became clear that Lily had already begun imagining a future neither Ethan nor Claire was yet brave enough to imagine for themselves. October arrived with cooler mornings and longer shadows stretching across the sidewalks outside Maple Ridge Elementary. The familiar routine that had quietly connected Ethan, Lily, and Claire now carried a gentle warmth that none of them openly acknowledged. Yet sometimes the greatest distance between two people is not created by disagreement. It is created by assumption. One afternoon, Claire asked the principal whether Ethan might be willing to help design a permanent outdoor reading corner for the students. She imagined a peaceful space beneath the old oak tree where children could discover stories surrounded by nature. The principal smiled and promised to ask him the next time he volunteered. Ethan accepted the invitation without hesitation, believing only that the school needed another set of capable hands. Over the next week, he measured the space, repaired an aging wooden bench, and built sturdy bookshelves from reclaimed cedar he had purchased with his own savings. He never submitted receipts or mentioned the extra hours he worked after finishing his regular job. For him, the smiles of children opening a favorite book were payment enough. Claire arrived one evening hoping to surprise him with dinner after noticing how late he had been working. Carrying 2 warm containers of homemade soup prepared by a local cafe, she stepped quietly toward the reading garden. Before she reached him, a board member from her company approached with several photographers who had come to document the new literacy project. This will be wonderful for the foundation, one of them said enthusiastically. People love stories about helping working families. Claire frowned slightly at the comment, but before she could respond, Ethan looked up from the unfinished bench and heard only those final words. His smile faded almost imperceptibly. Suddenly, every kind gesture Claire had shown him seemed different through the lens of that single sentence. He wondered if she had simply seen him as another charitable project worthy of publicity. Claire thanked the photographers politely and asked them to wait because she did not want pictures while volunteers were still working, but Ethan had already returned to sanding the wooden surface with quiet determination. When she finally reached him and offered the soup, he smiled with the same courtesy he always carried. Yet something gentle had disappeared from his eyes. You did not have to bring this, he said. I thought you might have skipped dinner again, Claire replied. That was thoughtful of you. His voice remained warm but carefully distant. The children will enjoy the reading garden. That is what matters. Claire searched his expression, sensing a quiet wall where open conversation had once existed. She could not understand what had changed. Over the following days, Ethan finished the project exactly as promised, but he arrived only when necessary and left as soon as the work was complete. Claire noticed the difference immediately. Their conversations became shorter. Their smiles became polite instead of effortless. Even Lily sensed the unexpected silence. "Did something happen?" she asked her father during the drive home one evening. Ethan kept his eyes on the road as golden leaves drifted across the windshield. "Sometimes good people simply belong in different worlds," he answered softly. Lily looked out the window, unconvinced. At nearly the same moment, Claire stood alone beside the completed reading garden, running her fingers gently across the smooth cedar bench Ethan had built with such care. She could not explain why the space felt quieter than before, only that somewhere between kindness and misunderstanding, two hearts that had been slowly moving closer had unexpectedly taken a step apart. The reading garden officially opened on a bright Saturday morning beneath a clear autumn sky, yet the quiet distance between Ethan and Claire remained as noticeable as the cool breeze drifting through the colorful maple leaves. Parents admired the handcrafted benches while children hurried from one shelf to another, excited to discover new adventures hidden inside fresh library books. Ethan stood near the edge of the garden, making one final adjustment to a wooden planter before preparing to leave unnoticed, exactly as he had planned. Claire thanked volunteers and greeted guests with the same gracious smile she offered at every community event, but inside she carried a growing sense of loss she could not explain. She had spent weeks wondering what she had done to push Ethan away, replaying every conversation in her mind without finding an answer. Before Ethan reached the parking lot, Lily gently tugged on his sleeve. "Dad, can we stay a little longer? Miss Claire wanted to show me the new books." Ethan hesitated before nodding. "Of course." Lily hurried toward Claire while Ethan remained several steps behind, giving them space. Claire knelt beside Lily with a warm smile. "I saved something special for you." She handed over a beautifully illustrated edition of The Secret Garden with Lily's name carefully written inside the cover. Lily hugged the book tightly before looking back toward her father. "Dad says gardens grow best when people keep showing up." Claire smiled softly, but her eyes reflected quiet sadness. "Your father is a very wise man." Lily tilted her head with the innocent honesty only children possess. "Then why do both of you look sad every time you see each other now?" The simple question left Claire speechless. A few moments later, while Lily wandered toward the reading shelves, the school librarian approached Claire carrying a small folder. "I almost forgot," she said. "These are the receipts Mr. Brooks refused to submit for reimbursement. He paid for every piece of cedar himself." Claire opened the folder slowly. Inside were neatly organized receipts along with a handwritten note that read, "Every child deserves a place where stories feel like home. Please do not mention this to anyone. Kindness loses something when it expects applause." Claire felt her throat tighten. At that same moment, the principal greeted Ethan near the entrance. "I heard you turned down the Foundation's Volunteer Recognition Award." Ethan smiled politely. "Someone else probably needs the encouragement more than I do." The principal looked surprised. "You know Claire personally now. She was disappointed you declined. She wanted to thank you privately, because she insisted there would be no publicity. She even dismissed the photographers that evening after realizing they made you uncomfortable." Ethan stood completely still. The memory of the board member's careless comment suddenly returned with painful clarity. He realized Claire had never viewed him as a charity project. She had been protecting the very dignity he believed she had overlooked. Across the garden, Claire slowly folded Ethan's handwritten note and pressed it gently against her heart for a brief moment before slipping it safely into her folder beside Lily's drawing. Neither of them spoke as their eyes met across the quiet courtyard. Yet something important had already changed. The misunderstanding that had quietly separated them was beginning to fade, replaced by a deeper truth neither title nor circumstance could ever hide. They were simply two people who had been trying, in different ways, to protect the dignity of the other all along. The annual Autumn Book Festival arrived 2 weeks later, transforming Maple Ridge Elementary into a place that felt almost magical beneath strings of warm lights and rows of colorful paper lanterns swaying gently in the cool evening breeze. Families wandered between reading tents, homemade bake sale tables, and student art displays while soft acoustic music drifted across the playground. Children laughed as they collected stamps for every book they explored, and for a little while the entire school seemed to move at the peaceful rhythm of shared stories. Ethan arrived with Lily just before sunset, carrying a homemade apple pie for the community table because Lily insisted that every celebration should include something made with love instead of money. Claire had spent the entire afternoon welcoming volunteers and thanking donors, yet she found herself looking toward the entrance far more often than toward the stage, where she would soon speak. When she finally saw Ethan and Lily walking through the gate together, something inside her quietly settled. They exchanged a gentle smile that carried far more honesty than any conversation either of them had managed during the past several weeks. Before either could find the right words, Lily spotted a group of classmates and hurried toward the activity stations with permission to meet them near the reading garden before the evening ended. Ethan and Claire slowly followed at a comfortable distance, speaking about ordinary things that somehow felt important again. They laughed about Lily insisting every bookshelf deserved a plant because books should never feel lonely. They talked about favorite childhood novels and small-town libraries that smelled of old paper and polished wood. The awkward silence that had separated them was gradually replaced by something quieter and stronger, the kind of trust rebuilt one sincere sentence at a time. As twilight deepened, the principal announced that every child should gather near the reading garden for the closing story beneath the old oak tree. Families began moving across the campus together, but when Ethan and Claire reached the garden, Lily was not waiting where she had promised. Ethan looked around calmly at first, assuming she had followed friends to another display. Claire checked nearby tables, smiling politely while asking volunteers if they had seen a little girl wearing a blue cardigan with a sunflower pin. Within minutes, they realized Lily had wandered farther than expected while searching for the final stamp in her reading passport. Neither of them panicked, but both immediately began walking through the festival together, calling her name with steady, reassuring voices so no other children would become frightened. They searched the library, the gymnasium, the art tent, and finally the quiet greenhouse beside the science garden where soft lights glowed through the glass walls. There they found Lily sitting cross-legged beside a nervous first-grade student who had become separated from his grandparents. Lily was reading aloud from her favorite adventure novel because, as she later explained with complete sincerity, stories made people feel less scared while they waited. Ethan knelt beside his daughter with visible relief, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. Claire smiled warmly at the little boy before guiding him back toward his grateful family. As they walked beneath the golden lights toward the festival together, Claire looked at Ethan with new certainty. Success had taught her how to build companies, but this quiet father and his remarkable daughter had shown her how character quietly built homes inside the hearts of other people, and she realized that the future she wanted was no longer defined by boardrooms or business plans, but by moments exactly like this one. Several months passed, and winter arrived quietly, wrapping Maple Ridge in crisp mornings, gentle frost, and the comforting glow of classroom windows that shined like lanterns before sunrise. The reading garden Ethan had built never sat empty. Children gathered there before school, during lunch, and long after the final bell, turning every handmade bench into a place where stories and friendships continued to grow. Claire often visited without announcing herself, not as the chief executive people admired in boardrooms, but simply as someone who loved watching children discover the confidence hidden inside a good book. Ethan continued living the same steady life he always had. He worked hard, cared for Lily, and offered help whenever someone needed it without expecting anything in return. Yet there was one beautiful difference now. He no longer walked through those days alone. One quiet afternoon, after the last school buses had disappeared beyond the neighborhood, Claire found Ethan placing a fresh coat of varnish on one of the cedar benches. The air smelled of pine, cold earth, and wood shavings. Neither of them hurried to speak. Comfortable silence had finally returned, no longer filled with uncertainty, but with trust. Claire stepped beside him, resting one hand lightly on the smooth wood. "You built something much bigger than a reading garden," she said softly. Ethan smiled. "I only built benches." She shook her head with gentle certainty. "No, you built a place where people feel they belong." Ethan looked toward the playground where Lily was helping younger students return books to the library cart. She reminds me every day what really matters. Claire watched Lily for a long moment before taking a slow breath. May I tell you something honest? Ethan nodded. For years I believed success meant reaching the highest place possible. Then I came here. I watched a father choose kindness when no one was watching. I watched a little girl measure wealth by how many stories she could share instead of how much money someone earned. Somewhere along the way, both of you changed the way I see my own life. Ethan lowered the paintbrush and met her eyes. You changed ours too. Claire smiled through eyes glistening with quiet emotion. Would it be all right if Lily had one more person waiting for her after school? The question settled gently between them, carrying no grand promises, only sincerity. Ethan looked toward his daughter before returning his gaze to Claire. I think she has been hoping for that answer longer than either of us. As though she had heard every word carried by the winter breeze, Lily came running toward them with a stack of library books hugged tightly against her chest. She looked from Ethan to Claire and smiled with the unmistakable confidence children sometimes have when adults finally catch up with what they have known all along. Without saying anything, she reached for one hand from each of them and quietly linked them together. None of the three spoke for several moments. They simply stood beneath the old oak tree while snowflakes drifted softly through the fading afternoon light. Years later, parents would still point toward the reading garden and tell new families about the man who built it with quiet hands and the woman who helped fill it with dreams. Few would remember their careers or accomplishments. They would remember something far more important. They would remember that dignity attracts respect, kindness creates second chances, and the strongest foundations for any family are built not with grand gestures, but with ordinary acts of grace repeated day after day. Beneath the old oak tree where countless children continued turning pages, three hearts walked home together, proving that the greatest love stories rarely begin with perfect timing. They begin when two good people finally recognize that home has been quietly waiting in each other all along. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.